On December 19th, 2025, the United States Treasury released a set of data that most of the financial world completely ignored. Amidst the noise of holiday shopping and year-end market rallies, a quiet earthquake occurred in the bond market. China's holdings of United States Treasuries fell to $688.7 billion. This is the lowest level since the great financial crisis of 2008. Mainstream media outlets like CNBC reported it as a minor footnote. Bloomberg analysts called it a routine portfolio adjustment. They want you to believe that this is just a normal part of global trade, a simple rebalancing of assets by a major central bank. But they are wrong. What we are witnessing is not a routine adjustment. It is a strategic withdrawal from the American financial system. To understand the magnitude of this shift, you have to look back just 12 years. In 2013, China held $1.3 trillion in American debt. Today, that number has been slashed by nearly half. Specifically, a $628 billion reduction. This represents a 47% collapse in their position as a creditor to the United States. But the most terrifying part is not just the total amount sold, it is the acceleration. In 2024 and 2025, the pace of these sales intensified to a level we have never seen before. For the first time since 2017, China has dropped out of the top 2 spots for foreign holders of United States debt, now sitting in 3rd place behind Japan and the United Kingdom. Think about the implications of that shift. The world's second largest economy, and America's primary geopolitical rival, is systematically dismantling its reliance on the United States dollar. They are exiting the burning building while the fire is still small enough for others to ignore. This move is the exact same mechanism that destroyed the British Empire in 1931. In that year, a single request from France to convert pounds into gold triggered a terminal decline that ended 200 years of British financial dominance. Today, the players have changed, but the math remains identical. The countdown to a systemic shift in the global reserve currency has already started. In the next 30 minutes, I am going to show you the documented data from the Congressional Budget Office and the Federal Reserve that reveals why this $688 billion figure matters more than any interest rate decision this year. We are approaching a mathematical threshold where the American debt trap snaps shut, and China has just provided the ultimate early warning signal. To understand the future of the United States dollar, we must first look at the tombstone of the British pound sterling. In the summer of 1931, the sun never set on the British Empire. The pound had been the world's undisputed reserve currency for over 2 centuries. To the average citizen in London, the idea of the pound losing its status was as unthinkable as the dollar collapsing is to an American today. But beneath the surface, the British finances were hollowed out. World War I had left the empire with massive debts that it could never truly repay. By 1931, debt service consumed 44% of total government revenue. Britain was trapped. They could not grow their way out because the global economy was sliding into the Great Depression. They could not print money because they were tied to the gold standard. France, a rising economic power at the time, saw the weakness that the rest of the world chose to ignore. They understood that the Bank of England held only £150 million in gold reserves, while foreign creditors held over £400 million in sterling deposits. It was a simple mathematical impossibility. In July 1931, France made a strategic move. They began requesting the conversion of their pound holdings into physical gold. It was not a sudden panic, but a methodical testing of the system. By September, the Bank of England was losing gold at a rate that terrified the leadership. Within 8 weeks, £200 million worth of gold was physically transported from London to Paris. On September 21st, 1931, the impossible happened. Britain capitulated. They abandoned the gold standard and essentially defaulted on their promises. The pound sterling lost 30% of its value overnight. The credibility that took 3 centuries to build vanished in a single afternoon. Within 15 years, the dollar had completely replaced the pound, and the largest empire in human history began its terminal decline. Now, fast forward to 2025. The parallels are not just similar, they are identical. Just as France did in 1931, China is today methodically testing the American system. While the media focuses on trade wars and diplomatic tensions, the real war is being fought in the Treasury market. China is liquidating the existing reserve currency, the dollar, while simultaneously accumulating the ultimate crisis hedge, gold. They are following the French playbook of 1931 to the letter. They have calculated the American debt trap with the same mathematical clarity that French ministers used 94 years ago. They know that when debt service reaches a certain percentage of revenue, the empire has no choice but to fail. As we look at the $380 trillion American debt in 2025, we must ask ourselves, are we already in our own version of that fatal summer? To understand why China is exiting the dollar, you must understand a mathematical trap called the Triffin dilemma. Named after the Belgian-American economist Robert Triffin, this theory states that the country whose currency is used as the global reserve faces an impossible paradox. For the world to trade, the United States must supply the world with dollars. To do this, the United States must consistently run large trade deficits, essentially exporting dollars and importing goods. This means the United States must go deeper and deeper into debt to provide the liquidity the global economy needs to function. In the beginning, this is a massive advantage. It allows the United States to consume more than it produces and borrow at low interest rates. But over decades, the debt grows so large that it eventually undermines the confidence in the currency itself. The more successful you are as a reserve currency, the more you must destroy your own balance sheet. By the end of 2025, the United States debt has reached $38 trillion. This is the ultimate manifestation of the Triffin dilemma. We have supplied the world with so many dollars through debt issuance that the total obligation now dwarfs our ability to repay. China has been watching this math for 40 years. They understand that every reserve currency in history, from the Roman denarius to the British pound, has followed this exact arc. First, the period of dominance fueled by expansion. Second, the period of overextension fueled by debt. And finally, the period of loss of confidence, where creditors realize the math no longer works. The data released in October 2025 shows that we have reached that final stage. When China drops its holdings to $688.7 billion, they are signaling that the Triffin dilemma has reached its breaking point. They no longer want to be the ones holding the bag when the paradox finally collapses. The Congressional Budget Office projections for 2026 and 2027 suggest that the United States will need to issue even more debt just to pay the interest on existing debt. This is the definition of a Ponzi scheme at a national level. In 1931, Britain reached this point when its debt to GDP ratio became unmanageable. Today, the United States debt to GDP ratio stands at 122.6%. China is not just selling bonds because of a trade war. They are selling because they have diagnosed a terminal disease in the dollar system. They see that the United States is trapped between two impossible choices. Either stop issuing debt and watch global trade freeze, or keep issuing debt and watch the dollar's value evaporate. China has made their choice. They are getting out before the exit door slams shut. When we look at the data from October 2025, we see a pattern that defies normal central bank behavior. Traditionally, central banks rebalance their portfolios by selling a small percentage of assets when prices are high and buying when they are low. This is known as portfolio management. But what China is doing right now is something entirely different. It is a systematic liquidation of a core asset. Since the peak in 2013, China has reduced its Treasury holdings by an average of over $50 billion every single year. However, the data from late 2024 and 2025 shows a dramatic acceleration. They are no longer just trimming the edges, they're cutting into the bone. One of the most critical details that the financial media missed in the December 19th report is the composition of what China is selling. They are not just selling short-term bills, they are dumping long-term bonds. This is a clear signal that they lack confidence in the long-term stability of the United States economy. By reducing their exposure to $688.7 billion, they have effectively neutralized the ability of the United States to use financial sanctions as a weapon against them. Think back to the frozen Russian reserves in 2022. China watched as the United States neutralized $300 billion of Russian assets overnight. This was a wake-up call for every central bank in the world. But for China, it was a confirmation of a strategy they had already begun. They realized that holding United States debt is not just a financial risk. It is a national security vulnerability. However, there is a deeper reason for this exit. China is preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer the primary medium of exchange. In 2025, China's trade with BRICS nations and other emerging markets reached a historic high. More than 50% of China's bilateral trade is now settled in yuan or other local currencies rather than the dollar. As they sell their treasuries, they are not just holding cash. They are recycling those dollars into hard assets across the globe. They are buying copper mines in Africa, lithium deposits in South America, and infrastructure across Southeast Asia. They are trading paper debt for physical wealth. This is the exact opposite of what the United States is doing. While America issues more paper debt to fund its consumption, China is getting rid of that paper as fast as the market can absorb it without causing an immediate crash. They are exiting the burning building of the dollar system and moving their wealth into the fortress of real commodities. The $688 billion remaining is just the final bridge. At the current pace of liquidation, China could reach a symbolic zero within the next decade. But they do not need to reach zero to destroy the dollar's status. They only need to reach the point where they are no longer the primary buyer of last resort. And as the data shows, we are already past that point. While China has been dumping United States Treasuries, they have been buying another asset at a record pace. That asset is gold. For 11 consecutive months, leading up to September 2025, the People's Bank of China has been a net buyer of gold, bringing their official reserves to 233 tons. But many independent analysts believe the true number, including unofficial holdings, is much higher. In October 2025, the world watched as gold prices broke $4,000 per ounce for the first time in history. This was not just a result of inflation or retail speculation. This was the result of a massive institutional shift. Central banks around the globe bought over 1,000 tons of gold in the previous year, the highest level since 1967. Why is this happening now? The answer lies in the 1931 playbook. When France started selling British pounds, they did not just hold on to French francs. They demanded gold. They knew that in a time of systemic collapse, paper promises are worthless. Only physical assets with 5,000 years of history as money can provide true security. China is doing the exact same thing. They are trading their depreciating United States debt for an asset that no government can print into oblivion. By stockpiling gold while the dollar is still relatively strong, they are preparing for the moment when the world loses faith in fiat currency. But there is a deeper strategic layer here. China is not just buying gold to hide it in a vault. They are using it to provide credibility to a new international trade system. There are increasing reports that the BRICS nations are exploring a gold-backed settlement unit. This would allow countries to trade with each other without ever needing a single United States dollar. If gold continues its climb toward $5,000, as many major banks now project for 2026, the value of China's reserves will explode while the value of their remaining treasury holdings continues to erode. This is a massive transfer of wealth and power from west to east. Think about the psychology of a bondholder. If you see your biggest creditor dumping your bonds to buy gold, what do? You follow suit. This creates a feedback loop. As more countries sell treasuries to buy gold, the price of gold goes up and the value of treasuries goes down. This forces the United States to offer higher interest rates to attract buyers, which only makes the debt trap even more lethal. The $4,000 gold mark was a psychological line in the sand. It signaled to the world that the era of cheap money and dollar dominance is over. China has moved its pieces into position. They have the gold, they have the commodities, and they are now waiting for the final mathematical collapse of the American debt machine. If China's selling is the external pressure, then the internal math of the United States debt is the ticking time bomb. As we close out fiscal year 2025, the numbers are not just concerning, they are mathematically catastrophic. The total United States national debt has crossed $38 trillion. But that is not the number that keeps Treasury officials awake at night. The number that matters is $970 billion. That is the total amount the United States spent just on interest payments in fiscal year 2025. To put that in perspective, for the first time in American history, we are spending more on interest than we are on our entire national defense budget. We are spending more to service the past than we are to protect the future. According to Congressional Budget Office projections, this number will cross $1 trillion annually by early 2026. This creates what economists call a debt spiral. When you have to borrow money just to pay the interest on the money you already borrowed, you have entered the terminal phase of a financial system. Think about the position of the Treasury Department. Every time a bond matures, they must issue a new bond to pay it off. This is called rolling over the debt. In 2025 alone, the United States must refinance $9.2 trillion in maturing debt. But who is going to buy it? Japan is reducing its holdings. China has dropped to $688.7 billion. Saudi Arabia is diversifying into other currencies. The pool of foreign buyers is shrinking at the exact moment the United States needs them most. When supply of bonds goes up and demand goes down, interest rates must rise to attract buyers. But here's the trap. Every half percentage point increase in interest rates adds roughly $100 billion to our annual interest bill. If the 10-year Treasury yield spikes to 5% because of a lack of buyers, our interest payments will jump from $970 billion to nearly $1.2 trillion almost overnight. At that level, interest payments consume over 20% of all federal tax revenue. This is the exact threshold that Britain hit in 1931 before the system collapsed. When 1 out of every $5 collected from taxpayers goes directly to bondholders, there is no money left for infrastructure, no money for Social Security, and no money for innovation. China sees this math with perfect clarity. They are not waiting for the default. They are watching the interest cost explode and realizing that the United States has no way out other than to print more money. And as any student of history knows, when a government starts printing money to pay its debt, the currency is already dead. In the hallways of the Federal Reserve in Washington, the atmosphere in late 2025 is one of quiet desperation. For years, Jerome Powell and his predecessors operated under the assumption that they could always control the economy by adjusting interest rates. But as China continues its $68 billion sell-off, the Fed has run out of room to maneuver. They are now trapped in a mathematical impossibility. On one side, the Fed needs to keep interest rates high to fight persistent inflation and to convince foreign creditors like Japan and the United Kingdom to keep holding American debt. If rates are too low, nobody wants to hold dollars. But as we saw in Part 6, high interest rates are now the very thing that is bankrolling the destruction of the United States budget. Throughout 2025, Jerome Powell tried to signal a soft landing. He cut rates cautiously, hoping to ease the pressure on the housing market and small businesses. But something strange happened in the bond market. Even when the Fed cut short-term rates, the long-term Treasury yield stayed high. The 10-year yield remained stuck at 4.14% in December 2025. This is a clear signal that the market no longer believes the Fed. Bond traders see the $38 trillion in debt and the $1 trillion in interest payments, and they are demanding a risk premium. They are telling the Fed, "We do not care if you cut rates, we know you are going to have to print money eventually." This leads to the second side of the trap, inflation. If the Fed cuts rates too aggressively to lower the government's interest bill, the dollar will lose its purchasing power. This would trigger a massive flight from the currency, causing prices for food, energy, and gold to skyrocket even further. If the Fed does nothing, the government faces a functional default as interest payments consume the entire budget. If the Fed prints money to buy the debt that China and others are selling, they trigger hyperinflation. This is the exact scenario that destroyed the Weimar Republic in Germany and more recently, the economy of Venezuela. China understands this choice perfectly. By accelerating their sales to $688.7 billion, they are forcing the Fed's hand. They are daring the Fed to start printing money to absorb the surplus of bonds. Every dollar the Fed prints to buy its own debt is a signal to the rest of the world that the game is over. In 1931, the Bank of England faced this same choice. They tried to maintain high rates to protect the pound, but the internal economic pain became too great. Eventually, they chose to devalue the currency and abandon their promises. As we head into 2026, the Federal Reserve is approaching that same moment of capitulation. Jerome Powell can save the government's budget, or he can save the dollar's value. He cannot do both. If the United States dollar is the engine of global finance, then the payment systems like SWIFT are the pipes through which the money flows. For decades, the United States has controlled these pipes, giving Washington the power to shut off any country from the global economy with the click of a button. But as we enter late 2025, China has finished building a completely new plumbing system. This system is called M-Bridge. Developed by the Bank for International Settlements in collaboration with the central banks of China, Thailand, the United Arab Emirates, and Hong Kong, M-Bridge reached its minimum viable product stage in mid-2024. But the real shift occurred in June 2024 when the Saudi Central Bank officially joined the project. Why is Saudi Arabia's involvement so critical? Because it signals the end of the petrodollar era. For 50 years, the world had to buy oil in dollars. Now, through M-Bridge, Saudi Arabia can sell oil to China and receive digital yuan or other local currencies instantly, bypassing the United States banking system entirely. By November 2025, the M-Bridge platform had already handled billions of dollars in real value transactions. It uses distributed ledger technology to settle payments in seconds rather than days, and at half the cost of the traditional SWIFT system. More importantly, it is immune to United States sanctions. Washington cannot freeze a transaction that never touches an American bank. While the plumbing was being installed, the political alliance was expanding. The BRICS group, which originally included Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, expanded in 2024 to include major energy players like Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates. This new bloc now represents 45% of the world's population and nearly 30% of global GDP. In March 2025, China announced the full integration of its digital yuan cross-border settlement system with 10 ASEAN nations and 6 Middle Eastern countries. This is not just a pilot program anymore. It is a functional, alternative financial universe. By the end of 2025, China processed over 3.4 trillion digital yuan transactions, and the People's Bank of China has just announced that starting January 1st, 2026, commercial banks will pay interest on digital yuan holdings. This move transforms the digital yuan from a simple payment tool into a legitimate store of value, a digital deposit currency that competes directly with the dollar. China is not just dumping treasuries because they want to leave. They are dumping them because they have already built the new house they are moving into. The plumbing of the post-dollar world is no longer a theory. It is installed, it is tested, and it is growing every day. As China's treasury holdings drop toward $600 billion, the volume on Enbridge is surging. The world is watching the largest architectural shift in financial history, and most people are still looking at the old blueprints. History does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes in 4 distinct stages. These stages represent the transition of a currency from global dominance to systemic failure. By looking at the data from December 2025, we can pinpoint exactly where the United States stands on this timeline. Stage 1. The slow burn. This occurred between 2013 and 2023. During this decade, China reduced its treasury holdings from $1.3 trillion to around $800 billion. The market largely ignored this as routine rebalancing. There was no panic, minimal media coverage, and Treasury officials dismissed concerns. This is the stage of complacency, where the empire still believes it is too big to fail. Stage 2, the acceleration. This is where we are right now, in late 2025. The pace of selling has intensified. China's holdings have dropped to $688.7 billion, and they have fallen to third place among foreign creditors. We are seeing the first cracks in the bond market, with yields remaining high despite Fed rate cuts. The narrative is shifting from routine adjustment to strategic exit. Stage 3, the liquidity crisis. Based on current trajectories, this is projected for mid to late 2026. This is the stage where multiple major holders start selling simultaneously. It is not just China anymore. Japan begins reducing exposure to defend the yen, and Saudi Arabia moves more reserves into gold and regional currencies. Treasury auctions start failing to clear at expected yields. The government tries to sell debt, but there are no buyers left at reasonable prices. Stage 4, the capitulation. This is the final act, projected for late 2026 to early 2027. This is the September 21st, 1931 moment. To prevent a total collapse of the government's ability to function, the Federal Reserve is forced to launch emergency bond purchases. They start printing money to buy the debt that nobody else wants. This is the point of no return. The dollar plunges against gold and hard assets, and the exorbitant privilege of the reserve currency officially ends. The evidence that we have entered stage 2 is undeniable. The data from October 2025 shows a 47% collapse in China's position over 12 years, with half of that decline happening in just the last few years. The velocity is increasing. In 1931, Britain moved from stage 2 to stage 4 in just 8 weeks. In the digital age, where capital moves at the speed of light, and systems like Enbridge are already operational, the transition could be even faster. We are no longer talking about a distant possibility. We are watching the gears of stage 2 grind toward the liquidity crisis of stage 3. The question is no longer if the pattern will complete, but when the final trigger will be pulled. As we stand on the final day of 2025, the data is no longer a warning. It is a reality. The United States national debt has surged to $38.4 trillion. Gold has closed the year at over $4,300 per ounce, a 65% gain in a single year. And China has reduced its stake in the American dream to just $688.7 billion. We are approaching our own September 21st moment. In 1931, it took only 8 weeks for the British Empire to lose its status. In 2026, with digital markets and alternative systems like Enbridge fully operational, the transition could happen in a heartbeat. What should you watch for in the coming months? There are 3 critical triggers. First, watch the $600 billion line for China. If their holdings drop below this level in early 2026, it signals a complete abandonment of the dollar as a reserve asset. Second, watch the 10-year Treasury yield. If it crosses 5% and stays there, the interest payments on our $38 trillion debt will become a black hole that consumes the entire federal budget. Finally, watch the price of gold. If it breaks $5,000, it means the world's central banks have officially moved to a new standard. The era of American financial dominance, built on cheap debt and the global need for dollars, is ending. China is not just attacking the dollar. They are simply the first to exit a system that is no longer mathematically sustainable. They have seen the ghost of 1931 and chose not to repeat the mistake of holding onto a dying currency. The question is not whether the system will change, but whether you are prepared for the world that comes next. When the history books are written about the mid-2020s, they will point to December 19th, 2025, as the day the signals became too loud to ignore. The empire is cracking, the math is breaking, and the pattern is repeating. If this analysis helped you connect the dots, hit that subscribe button. As we move into the volatility of 2026, I will be here to break down every major Treasury auction, every BRICS summit, and every move in the gold market with the logic and historical context you won't find on mainstream news. Drop a comment below. Do you think 2026 will be the year of the great pivot? The math says yes. The only thing left is the timing.